Grand Touring Motorsports started as a social group of car enthusiasts, but we've expanded into all sorts of motorsports disciplines, and we want to share our stories with you. Years of racing, wrenching, and motorsports experience brings together a top-notch collection of knowledge and information through our podcast, Break Fix. What's going on, everybody? Tonight, it's your host, Brad, and with me as always is Eric.
Heyo.
If you've been following along with our previous episodes, you'll note that we've been focusing on what it takes to get involved in motorsports. We've covered everything from picking the right starter car to getting ready for your first event and different programs and organizations that exist in this community. And on tonight's episode, we continue this talk track as we dig in deeper, talking about the questions that's always on everyone's mind, safety. And with us tonight, we have returning guest Crutch on behalf of the GTM coaches, along with our special guest, Mark Francis from OG Racing, one of the largest motorsport safety distributors in the U.S., to discuss a concept we call safety as a system.
Welcome to the show, Mark.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me.
I don't think we can deny the fact that we all get excited over buying yet another mod for our cars. And lots of people buy items like seats and belts and steering wheels without really knowing what the impact to them or their vehicle might be. So our plan tonight is to address some of the more popular safety items with Mark and explain the do's and don'ts, as well as talking about how they're designed to work together. So how about we get into it? So Mark, first up, let's talk about steering wheels. Should drivers be changing them? Should they be going to a smaller size, a larger size? Is there a debate about leather versus suede?
I found that leather versus suede really, for drivers picking an aftermarket wheel for their car, comes down to preference. I generally tell guys when they're looking at wheels, if it's a dual purpose car, it's a car they drive to work at, or at least sometime on the street, a suede wheel with the oils and things from our skin will eventually wear on them over time, where, in a race car, you got your gloves on, so you don't have that issue. On my track car, I prefer suede. I just like the feel for some reason. The two really comes down to preference. I do discourage guys sometimes think they want to go down to like a smaller wheel, which, if you drive a car without power steering, that smaller wheel requires more effort to turn the car as you're turning in and exiting the corner, especially on an air-cooled 911. No power steering. It's better to have a 350 millimeter wheel because it gives you a little more leverage. I know guys who like bigger 380. Of course, when you joke around and call them the school bus wheel that Sparco makes.
Yeah, we have the opposite problem on the front wheel drives. We always go with smaller wheels so they'll turn in quicker. It just makes life a little easier. So I guess it comes down to the type of car. But what you've said so far makes a heck of a lot of sense.
Should people swapping wheels be concerned that they're losing their airbag?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'll take the official line that if the car is a street car registered in a state that has a safety inspection, you are not supposed to remove the airbag steering wheel. Now they're saying with the new cars, with the smart airbags being part of the system and built into the seats, that debate has raged on the forums. I don't own a car new enough to have that problem. The cars I track don't have airbags in them. I have seen a car have a single car off at Summit Point years ago. 80s car had, early first generation airbags in it. And he didn't even hit anything. He hit a bump, going through the gravel trap in turn 3 at Summit and the airbag deployed. Burned his wrists. It was a summer event where they were allowing short sleeve shirts. And he drove into the pits and tossed it out onto the ground of the pit lane and went back on the track.
I have seen, there was some car, one of the recent generations, it was some performance car, it was like a Corvette or Mustang or something that was actually, I think it was one of the Corvettes, was actually having a problem with accidental airbag deployment during spirited driving, where people were driving around racetracks and the airbags would just happen to trigger in some situations. And this wasn't just the wheel airbag. I think it was one of the side curtains too. So there's always the risk of that. But then that gets back to the whole safety as a system thing. Whereas if you're taking out that steering wheel airbag, that's part of your defense against the type of neck injuries that the full harness, Hans, and helmet and all would take care of. So
exactly,
you are taking a risk by swapping out just that steering wheel when not going with the rest of the system, as we're going to talk about.
I mean, I think you're taking a risk if you have a car equipped with Takata airbags to begin with. So I have removed all of mine, and we'll move on from that statement.
You mean Claymores?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So with that
actually, I got the recall for my M3. I need to make the appointment at the dealer. Parts in stock now to replace mine.
Yeah, my recall was right in the waste bin. But with that being said, so the next thing people really get excited about for their car, I'm going to the track. I got to buy seats. And They don't realize what they're getting themselves into. And it lends itself to a conversation not just about seats and proper seats, but belts and harnesses and all sorts of other things. So let's begin to slowly unpack that. Let's talk about seats. There's all sorts of different kinds of seats out there, be them fixed back, metal, fiberglass, Kirky aluminum, and then you have your adjustable seats, etc. Let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to these different seats, especially in the context of motorsport.
I'll share a conversation I usually have when I get an HBDE2, PCA Blue Group. I'm not sure how you guys break your run groups down. The driver that's maybe had his first solo, he's talking about putting R compound tires on the car. And then when we get into the discussion about seats, they'll ask me, but, should I get what about a reclining sports seat? And I tend to steer them, if they're going to do it, if this is a car that's primarily track, then a fixed back seat is a better option. The sports seats I found don't provide as much lateral support. And it's amazing with these guys when they, you have a guy that's been driving with a street seat, or even like a reclinable seat that has at least shoulder pass-throughs to run like a 4-point belt. I guess we'll discuss the belts in a little while. But when they get into the fixed back seat, that's when they realize how much they were holding on, whether pushing their knee against the door, holding onto the steering wheel to keep themselves centered in the seat. And they're like, I should have done this 2 years ago, because a proper race seat keeps you centered, relaxed. So you're not using the muscles in your body to try to stay put and keep from sliding. I did it when I was a beginner, knee pushing on the door panel to try to keep me in the seat. My feeling has always been, if you're going to put seats in track car, especially if you have aspirations for moving on to time trials or club racing at some level, skip the sports seat, because you're going to get to the wanting a fixed back seat anyways.
So how does one choose the right seat? I know that's always a big thing, right? It's almost like buying shoes. So in your opinion, how do you choose the right seat for you, or for your car for that matter?
I tell people that I talk to that, don't live near an OG Racing where we have a showroom, seats out on display. You can walk in there and spend 3 hours trying on seats, just like you could try on shoes. But I'll encourage them, when you're at the track, go talk to the guy who's there, who's got a race car there, a cage. Say, hey, you mind if I sit in your seat? And then I also tell them, don't walk over there eating a chili dog and have food all over your fingers, or screwdrivers in your pockets. Be mindful of that. A lot of guys will probably say, sure, man, have a seat. Because if you don't have an idea of what fits, it's hard to pick one. They all fit a little differently. You have a lot of manufacturers out there: Sparco, O&P, Racetech, Recaro. Some of the other ones that the tuner guys like, I think the Bride seats and Momo, Saybelt, the Kirky aluminum seats, Butler seats. The list goes on and on and on. But they're all sort of shaped a little differently. In the case of the fixed back seats that are FIA certified, they've passed the same testing, of course, with the exception being the Racetech seats that have that newer certification up to 60 Gs. I forgot the number on it. But our body types are all different. So, find one of these seats, Sparco and O&P, Recaro, they're all high quality. They've all been designed properly, gone through the testing, the safety testing on them. I've seen the end results of rollovers, hits in the tire wall, multiple hits in the tire wall, hits in concrete walls with all of them, and it's amazing that they hold up. They do. I've got one in my basement. The car was, and while at Summit Point on the outside going into one, the car rolled twice in the air and turned around and came down with the back end facing the skid pad. Landed upright, and the seat held. The side mounts, as soon as we unbolted them from the seat, they sprung crooked, but everything stayed in place. Driver walked away and was in the paddock. But go for fit, because a race seat is just like a pair of shoes. There's nothing worse than walking around all day in a pair of shoes that don't fit right, or pants that don't fit right. Think of the seat that way, because that's your desk. Think of that as the business end. When you're in the cockpit, that's what's keeping you secure, along with the rest of your safety system, your harnesses and everything. But, that's the office. You want it to be comfortable.
I was just going to piggyback on what Mark was saying about walking around the paddock and talking to people and asking if you can sit in their seats. if you're going to do that, look for someone that's got a similar body type to yours.
Good point. I meant to say that.
You'll hear it in our big guy, little car episode, but there's several people that we're all 6'4". I mean, there's like 5 or 6 of us that are 6'4", 6'5" in the group, but we all have different body types. We're all different sizes and we don't fit in each other's cars because of that. So look for somebody that's of a similar build to you and then ask if you can sit in their car, assuming they have the stuff that you're interested in buying.
Okay. Yeah, it's an excellent point.
A lot of people nowadays are shopping online for a lot of things. And maybe, I found that great deal on Amazon for that, Corbeau seat or something. I don't know. Is there a guide, though, that, how to measure yourself and then measure a seat for fitment? Like, as an example, I find the older Corbeau TRSs super comfortable. A lot of people hate them. Mm-hmm. I also find the Sprint 5 extremely comfortable, but it's a very narrow seat. My sister has a Sparco Corsas. I hate them. They're way too narrow, right? They're way too thin. I've also found like the Evo 2 US is more comfortable than the Evo 2, things like that. But I also know my measurements because I've sat in a lot of different seats. Like mm-hmm. I need a minimum, so many inches on the bottom and height and all this kind of thing. But is there a good reference or a guide out there for people that are shopping that aren't able to go to a showroom?
Yeah. All the manufacturers do put out their own sizing charts where they'll measure, width across the shoulders, torso length from bottom of the seat to the shoulder belt cutouts. They'll measure in the hip area at the front end of the seat, between your thighs and your knees. But they tend to measure some areas a little differently. We've been trying to standardize it, so you could do a side-by-side comparison. Right now with the manufacturers, doing certain measurements they vary. It's hard to compare a Recaro or a Sparco to an OMP because of their sizing charts are different. I've tried to take that data, put it in US standard of measurement, and also try to get the measurements from the same points to do a comparison. Where I try to give them a starting point is, make sure it's not too tight in the hips where it's going to pinch, because, that'll lead to discomfort over the course of a 30-minute session on the track. And also the importance of making sure your shoulders are not totally above the shoulder belt openings, where it makes the shoulder belts have to go in an incorrect angle that would create compression when you tighten the belts. We try to avoid that. I tell them to sort of use that as a starting point.
We've talked a lot about different kinds of seats, and one of the next things that comes into question is whether those seats should be fixed or on sliders. What is your recommendation when it comes to that?
If you're using a proper double locking slider available from Sparco, OMP, Recaro, and if you're sharing a car, in a lot of cases, the person's not able to fix mount it. And, my race car, I had a slider in it because my wife drove it. And if you have a, height difference, it can't fit. If Brad and I were going to share a car, we're going to have a slider in the car, being that he's 6'4". The times where I've seen people not use them is person not sharing a car and it's somebody who's tall. Because someone who's short, where their seat's positioned when they're driving, may have trouble getting in and out of the car. I've seen that too. In the event they had to get out of the car in a hurry, they're squeezing out because the seat's fixed mounted and, they're 5'3", sitting right up on the steering wheel.
I've also heard some wives' tales about the sliders aren't safe because it's a failure point in the whole system there.
This is where you run into people buying stuff on eBay, counterfeit sliders that aren't double locked that could fail. The lock mechanism fails. Now, if you have a race seat in the car with harnesses on and everything, the harnesses are attached to their mounting points. The seat can't go forward and slam you into the dashboard, because the harnesses aren't going to allow it. But it goes down to, proper installation in most cases. Rarely have I seen a slider made by a motorsports manufacturer fail. The car I was telling you about that had the big hit at Summit Point and the rollover, and it was airborne and came crashing down, fortunately right side up, that car had a slider in it. The slider was, we threw all the hardware was replaced afterwards, because it was such a violent impact, but it did not fail. Everything was still locked in place where it should be.
So that brings up an interesting question that often comes up, which is when you're using a fixed back seat without a roll hoop, without any type of roll bar, you now are in a seat that has no way of deflecting out of the way in a rollover crash, and you are also held more upright in a rollover crash.
My thoughts on that, when I have a person asking about seats, my next question is, Do you have a roll bar or a roll cage in the car? Are you going to be installing one when you put the seats in? And I'll tell people if they say, no, I'm going to do that later, then I tell them that don't do the seats now. The beginners don't see it as a system. They see it as, oh, I can add this piece, and then next month I'll add that piece. If you're going to do it right, when you get to that crossroads, when you're driving on the track, when people start talking about racing tires, oh, I'm going to put a I'm going to do a flash on my 997 turbo. Are you putting seats in a roll bar? Oh no, I'm going to use 3-point belts. That's what I'll tell them. Please don't do that. I tell them, whether it's someone I'm instructing who asks me or someone who's asking me, in my role at OG Racing, which there's so much overlap. For me, it's just about one and the same at this point. I will tell them, if you're going to a fixed back seat and you want to start using harnesses, roll bar or roll cage. Obviously, if it's a dual purpose car, you don't want to tell them, put a cage with NASCAR bars and everything in a car you're going to drive on the street. That presents its own safety hazards. Like hitting your head on that section of the cage in the front with no helmet on, if you're driving the car on the street.
It's very refreshing to actually hear someone in the business say that, because we have had experience with other vendors that have touted the benefits of fixed back seats that'll hold you in place better, and it's a cheap and easy upgrade, and that's the only thing you need to do to get better lap times. It's good to hear a vendor get proper advice.
If you have a person that's not putting the rollover protection in, and you're going to sell them a fixed back seat, then what are they using for? Are they using a 3-point seat belt, a racing seat with the higher bolsters on the sides? There's another set of problems you're creating with the lap belt not being able to, that retracting, locking lap belt that's part of your street safety system, not functioning properly if it's not over your hips.
Like you said, 3-point with a fixed back seat will cause submarining in an accident. I've heard that harnesses with a regular stock seat or adjustable seat will break your pelvis in an accident.
And I've seen people do that. I've seen guys get in the car and take their 3-point. It goes right over the top of those tall 5 bolsters, like on a OMP WRC or a Cobra Suzuka seat that's got those big, tall 5 bolsters. I'm like, you're going to slide right underneath it, because the pretension thing that locks it, in the event of hard deceleration or an impact, isn't going to be able to function because the belt's not across your hips.
And I think that's the overarching theme of this entire episode is safety as a system. Yeah, you can upgrade your seats and your harnesses and you get your head and neck restraint and everything and the roll bar. That itself is a system, but your car's stock OEM equipment is a system in and of itself.
Yes. So if you start mixing bits and pieces of the two, the pieces don't fit.
They become a disparate system. That's what they're known as.
Yes.
I think you touched on something really important here as we lead into the conversation about belts versus harnesses, but there's one more piece to the seat equation that I don't think a lot of people understand, but it does lean itself to another later part of the conversation where we talk about head and neck restraint, because again, this is all a system. The whole point of the conversation here is we are building up to a kind of final package, what you should be really at, and that investment that you need to make. So the other one here about seats in particular is halos. And everybody looks at them and goes, ooh, that's super cool. That halo seat's really kind of neat. But the problem is there's a time and a place for a halo seat, just like there's a time and a place for a fixed back seat. So would you care to elaborate on the whys and why nots of a halo seat?
Okay, the whys in a race car with the rest of your proper safety system, it's a good idea. It protects, from that lateral impact. Pancake into a door, car hitting you in the door, you hitting the tire wall into the door. The head neck restraints are primarily focused on that forward motion. Now, with the advent of some of the newer ones, like the Simpson Hybrid S, that with the way the tethers are designed, it is to help sort of offset impact to keep your head straight. Halo seats in a race car, good idea. Halo seats in a dual purpose car you're driving on the street, not so good idea, because they limit some of your side vision that you need on the street. That quick look over your shoulder, changing lanes. Where you go to check your blind spot, can't do that with a halo seat in street driving.
And we're not going to get into the extreme versions of these systems, but with a halo, the expectation is that there's a window net. and that there's arm restraints.
Yes.
And there's all sorts of other things that a full club racing car would have that your normal HPDE driver just getting started, who we're, catering to in this particular conversation, that's way beyond what they need to go to the track.
Yes. Yeah. For our HPDE friends and students, customers, however you want to refer to us, it's not something that's entirely required. That's my personal feeling on it. Like your car, if you made the Audi a full-on race car, I would say, yeah, it's another part of the system that reduces your chances of injury. Should you have an impact or an off that leads to an impact. Especially our guys with the dual-purpose cars, we have a lot of them. I see a lot of them at the, whether it's one of your events, PCA Driver's Ed, BMW CCA, HPDE, NASA. There's a lot of guys driving the cars to the track. One of my coworkers does it. He's got race seats in his car and a harness bar, which I keep telling him, you need a roll bar, dude. You need a roll bar, because he's getting up to the point he's soloing now. Now, he's still on street tires, so I'll give him that. He hasn't slapped Hoosiers on the thing yet.
But what I want to talk about, Mark, next is really the difference between a belt and a harness. So do you want to explain 3-point, 4-point, 5-point, 6-point? I mean, soon they're going to be up to 10 points, right? So what does all that mean to somebody that's just starting out?
Well, of course, I tell people, we all use the term, what kind of belts do you have in the car, even though what we are referring to are their racing harness. Obviously, belts to the beginner, 3-point seatbelt. I know that there are some 4-point ones out there now. It used to be that going on the track, a lot of car clubs would not let you use a 4-point with a race seat on the racetrack because it did not have an anti-sub belt, which is that belt that comes up between your legs to keep you from sliding out from under the belts. Now, I know that Schroff makes one that has that where it tensions the shoulders. I forgot how they work. I haven't tried them.
I'm pretty sure the way the Schroff 4-point works, in order to prevent you from submarining, there's a doubled over section of belt on one shoulder that breaks free in an accident so that it lets your body roll forward to not go under the belt.
So it simulates a 3-point.
Yeah, simulates a 3-point tensioner with a 4-point belt.
Oh, so it breaks away probably on the inside one, so your body can go.
Yeah,
not towards the window, but go.
Yeah, it doesn't break away fully. It has like a section that's folded over and stitched, but not stitched as strongly, so that it then becomes longer on just that side.
So the stitching will pull if you were to have a hard impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've seen people get those and use them with a stock seat. I've just never been a fan of that. And I know in the old days, even in Porsche Club, you could use a harness with a stock seat and have the sub belt just go right up in front of you, which of course now has been pretty much banned by everybody. The seat has to have a proper pass through.
But I think the consensus here is 4 points are a no-go. Don't even bother, for the cost differential, buy a 5-point or a 6-point, whatever you can get. One of the things that I wanted to call into question was CG locks. What do you think of those for the folks still running 3-point belts?
I tried one time. We don't sell them at OG. I don't think OG ever did. It was nice that it did tighten you could get the lap, the portion as you came over to snap into the receptacle, you could snug it so it was firm across your hips. I didn't see it as a bad thing, but I just don't. Like I said, I never really used one in practice. I know the people that bought them liked them. I don't think they create any safety hazards. But as I tend to tell people, if you're looking at that kind of stuff, start considering doing the safety system, as your next upgrade. But back to harnesses, yes. Now there are these 4-point ones that they say they are legal to use with race seat and tested. The FIA has tested them. I don't know about SFI since they're European manufacturer. And I don't think I've ever sold a 4-point belt to somebody. And then there's 5 and 6-point. Now, 6-point, basically, you have a sub belt that's doing the same thing as the sub belt in a 5-point harness, but it's got 2 attachment points, which has more places to make sure it doesn't come loose or come out, the better.
There's always a debate between what's better, 5 and 6, and different companies don't even make 5s anymore. I mean, I buy G-Force, and they go either way, depending on how you want to set it up.
They make the SFI belts, they make either way. The European belts that I've been seeing, the last 5-10 years are all 6-point. Race Tech at one point made a 5-point, but they haven't for a long time.
Yeah.
So I think the FIA standard now is 6. for competition. And it's basically 2 attachment points, for the sub instead of a single.
But
yes,
some people want to save a buck or two, like you said earlier, go on the eBay route or on Amazon. And so there are some manufacturers that are more expensive than others, and I've priced out different ones. I have a tendency to like G-force belts because they're wider. So some people don't take that into consideration. The width of the belt across their shoulders and across their hips and things like that, they tend to be a little bit wider. Sparcos are a bit narrow. And this is just a personal thing. I dislike Schroff because of the placement of the cam. I don't like it on the sub. I prefer it coming across my hip. So there's all these other considerations when you're looking at belts and the way your car is set up, maybe the way your cage is set up. My cars are set up for time trial, so I've got a different type of cage in my car. So all these things are taken into consideration during the setup process. So I think it's very subjective when it comes down to that, but I think we can all agree that 5 and 6 point are the way to go, especially if you're going to use a fixed back seat. So the bigger question that is unanswered is why should you never run harnesses with a stock seat?
Because the shoulder belt, race seats have a pass-through for a reason. So they come straight over your shoulders and down, to where they attach to the laps and the sub through the cam lock in the case of those. And they still make latch link ones too. But with them going around the seat, there's where there's a chance for it to slip off your shoulder, despite how tight you get them, because they are not coming straight. You've now created a curve. They have to go around that, the back of the seat and then come back over your shoulders. It's just not a good way to go. Most of the track groups, and I'm guessing you guys are probably the same, have it in the technical regulations. You cannot use a racing harness unless you have a racing seat.
Yes, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Everyone's gotten away from that. The other thing I wanted to say why we're talking about belts is for your listeners to be very careful of what you buy online. I don't know if you guys have seen the now semi-infamous video of the guy somewhere in Eastern Europe who bought counterfeit OMP harnesses for 40 euros. And they said these were OMP FIA 6-point belts. The guy's in-car video, it's all over YouTube, and I think it's been on Facebook. And he had an impact into a tire wall. Those belts failed in multiple places, including the tabs that you would, the snap-in ends that would go into an eye bolt.
Right.
Those broke. Yeah, these were counterfeit belts. The guy's chest hit the steering wheel. The steering wheel was deformed. He went forward to the inside, came back, and is sitting there slumped over, moving, and obviously a lot of pain. So if you see what should be a $350 pair of harnesses for $50, and they say they're brand new, run.
Okay, so you mentioned that the slots in the seats and the sport seats are designed to allow the belts to pass through straight over your shoulder. Now, because of my size, there are very few seats where those inserts or those holes are straight over my shoulder. Is that something that I need to be concerned of as a larger person, or is it the belt coming into the seat a little bit lower, going up over my shoulder? Is that still okay?
In the car you drive now, are your shoulders, an inch above the top of the opening, or are they somewhat close?
I would say probably about an inch.
From the top. What seat do you have in the car?
Well, I've got a Corbeau Sport. I don't have harnesses. I'm still using a 3-point. Gotcha. I've got a Corbeau recliner. But this is something that I plan on doing over the off season. So I want to make sure that I get, the correct seats for my body type. Not just fitment wise, but with the inlets for the harnesses as well.
Are you tall in the torso, legs, or a little of both?
It's a little of both, but primarily in the legs.
Okay. See, being long-legged and tall it makes it a little easier. Most of the manufacturers now make a wide and tall or tall seat for people your height. It's 6'4". So there are certain seats you're not going to fit in, but there are seats out there that, and this would be another thing to sit in. A couple examples. Sparco makes this new one called the Pilot. It's a halo seat. If I sit in it, my head is probably 3 inches below or 4 inches below the top of the seat. I'm only 5'11". The shoulder belt opening, the bottom of the shoulder belt cutouts is probably 3 inches above my shoulders. When I sat in one just for giggles in the showroom. Racetech makes in some of their seats, they make a wide, then they make a wide and tall for someone your size that you would fit in it and be like, wow, this is comfortable, like it's made for you.
Now you have to be really careful because some of those seats get so big that you'll only be able to track an Escalade. So if you want to jam that in a new Mustang, it ain't going to happen, right? With a low roof line or a Supra or anything like that. So you got to be really careful.
Sparco used to make a seat. They just stopped it after 2019. It was called the Ergo, and they made 3 sizes: small, medium, and large. The large was for tall. It was wide. In a car that still had door panels and all its interior and sound deadening, it wasn't going to fit. You know, we had a guy try to put one in a 997, and it just wasn't going to go to the stock mounting locations. If you've got a car where you're gutting it, it's getting a roll cage. In those cases, you'd be surprised at how big a seat you can put. You know, I saw one of those large Ergos put in a Cayman. Now, they had cut the original mounting out. They'd made a plate, welded a plate to the floor, basically had the thing down on the floor because the guy was 6'5", but that was the only way they could get the seat in. You know, with our friends who have dual purpose cars, yes, when you get into those larger seats, OMP used to make one called the Big. I did see a guy get it in a Mustang. He tried to put 2, wasn't going to happen. They would touch in the middle and you couldn't close the doors.
I mean, this is the point where you just say, all right, the heck with it. I'm cutting the windshield and the roof. I'm going E-prepared. And it doesn't matter at that point. You got all the room in the world. But, but that's a whole nother story.
But so when it comes time for me to start buying my stuff, just to give OG a little plug here, I am going to go down and see the experts at OG and sit in a bunch of seats, and they're going to tell me the right stuff for my car. So I don't need to worry about it because I know OG's got me covered.
I mean, he drives a flying brick. I mean, the Golf's got all the headroom in the world. So.
Yeah, I was going to say if you strip out a Golf, there's a lot of real estate in there to put a big seat in. And, of course, with the big, tall roof line.
He's got nothing on Mike, though, with the Beetle. Talk about headroom. he's swimming in that thing. But at any rate, so we've talked a lot about seats, but let's kind of wrap up this conversation about belts and seats together, because there's something really important here from a coaching perspective, because a lot of organizations will lean on us as instructors to say, you guys you should really do a kind of ocular pat down of these belts, check them out, do an inspection. And I'm like, what the heck does that mean? Am I sitting here checking dates? I understand that this stuff apparently expires, but I don't think it's like a carton of milk where all of a sudden it's gone bad. So can you really explain to us what it means when a belt expires or a seat expires? When I'm supposed to kind of do this inspection of these belts or these seats, what am I looking for?
What you mainly want to look for is condition. I'll give you an example. I have a pair of belts they're in the garage. I used them once in a borrowed car. I didn't like the belts that were in it. I bought belts, installed them, attempted to run the club race. We had some mechanical issues that led to my retirement. Took my belts out, put his belts back in because I didn't like it. I didn't like the adjusters. I just didn't like them. It was a total preference thing. Now, would those belts be unsafe if you took them in a car? They expired in December of 2019. Would they be unsafe if I took them out on the track? Of course not. They haven't been used. Where I've seen old belts that were expired 5+ years ago, the car spent a lot of time outside, the material does degrade. It gets stiff. The adjusters start to bind, the little things like that. The clubs require now, and I think probably has a lot to do with liability, when the expiration date's on the belt, they're junk. You have to replace them. And the sanctioning bodies go with that, the expiration date. And I know that SFI now has an expiration date on them. The labels used to have the date of manufacturer, and you'd go 2 years out from the date of manufacturer. Now they have an expiration date on them. I'll say not valid past, February 2021. I just threw that in. It was a random date. But seats too, a lot of it is condition. If it's a car that's, stored in a garage, the car gets taken out once or twice a year, does some HPDE, it's never had an impact. I tell people, if you've had a severe crash where they required the car to be towed in and you had to go to medical to be checked out, replace the seat. It has been deflected, stress within the G loading that they're tested for. Just put another seat in the car.
So the last part of this triumvirate or trifecta here is the head and neck restraint. So we've talked about the seats, we've talked about the belts, and you threw out there and kind of hinted at, Hans and Simpson hybrids, and we talked about halos. I mean, there's even, collars and things like that. How does that play into this whole system?
One, not a fan of neck collars. The old foam ones like they give you at the kart track. In a car at the speeds that you're going, I don't like it. I feel like, it makes your helmet not feel as heavy, but I feel like in the event you do have let's say you have an impact with a tire wall, you're going to get this sort of whiplash effect with it because it's going to compress and it's going to push back as your head goes back. I don't know, some people may say that's a wives' tale, but I've just never been a fan of those. Of course, now a lot of the clubs, if you're using a harness, they've made a head and neck restraint mandatory. TCA does, it's required. I imagine BMW has done it. Not sure about NASA, but at this point, really, most people are wearing them. Guys who have race seats and harnesses in the car, even if they're HPDE people, are wearing a head and neck restraint at this point. I don't see a reason not to. The knock was, I can't turn my head. I don't like it. It's uncomfortable. There are multiple devices out there. You can find one that works for you, whether it's a next gen, a Hans, a Simpson hybrid, the Schroff Flex. Sparco sells one that's made by Stan 21. It's like a Hans. They fit a little differently. Find the one that's comfortable. What I tell people, they've been, the Hans and the Stan 21, the Schroff, the ones that are European have FIA certification in addition to SFI. Some Hans you can get one that's either SFI, FIA, or both. I think it's the same device, and they put both labels on it because I know a lot of people running in the oval track world, they require SFI stuff.
And what's funny about the Hans is there's an expiration there too, but it's a giant piece of carbon fiber. Isn't that the padding and the tethers that need to be updated, but not the physical unit itself?
Hans wants to see your device, I think about every 4 years. They'll examine it. You should replace your tethers. Clubs now will check dates on tethers. I think BMW CCA, it's within 2 years. They'll make you replace them. They're cheap. They're $40. You can buy a new tether. Hans wants you to send the device back. They will put a new SFI sticker on it with more current dates. And I know some clubs will enforce that. Some do not. If you're in an impact, I would have your device checked. If you're in a serious wreck, send it back to them, pay them. They'll put new tethers on it. They'll check to see if there are any cracks or anything that could render it unsafe and have it fail should it be tested again, with another impact.
Yeah, and I spent the extra money for the adjustable Hans, which I have adjusted once and never messed with ever again. So, to your point about fitment, right? And I had to get the adjustable Hans because of the particularities of my car and stuff like that. And there was an issue with the regular one with clearance with the seat and all that. Again, reiterating the fact that all of this stuff works together. You can't just go pick it off the shelf. It all has to be fitted. It has to be fitted with you in the car.
So we're talking about all this as a system, and we've talked about them a couple times, but is there really such a thing as a safe dual-use car? If you're using belts without a hands, you're not safe. But if you're using if you have fixed seats in the car, you need to use belts to get proper safety. So therefore, you'd have to use a Hans while driving on the street, which means wearing a helmet, which screws with your visibility.
And technically, it's illegal in a lot of states to run harnesses on the street, so you still have to have a 3-point belt if you have tags on the car. So it becomes a whole kind of cluster there at the end of the day.
I do know guys that will change out their seat. Their car has the roll bar in it. That roll bar is in the car. And a couple days before they leave for the track, they'll go out in the garage and take the stock seat out, put their race seat in. All their mounting for their harnesses is there. Install that. They will drive it out to the track. And some guys still trailer, even if it's a dual-use car, they'll still trailer it to a track event, in the event something breaks, so they can get home. When they want to take the car out on the street, they'll swap the seats out. Some states will say you can't use your harnesses on the street. I still think you can have a safe dual-use car. I think you can.
Mike, I think I would want to redefine what dual-use means, because to me, I would see it as, in the case of this particular conversation, we could have a dual-use car that can do autocross and track, and it would be safe for both, but not street and track, and not street and autocross or hill climb or whatever. And I will say, if you look at the different regs, especially if you go to SCCA or NASA or some of the organizations and read through like the GCR, it's an endless Bible of information there. There's a lot about how cages are built, how the restraint systems are supposed to be put together, and then they will have caveats based on the discipline. So if you're in rallycross, there's extra things you have to do. If you're in club racing, there's other things you have to do. I would say the great compromise, though, if you're looking to build a Swiss Army knife from a safety perspective, and Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you follow hill climb / time trial spec, it's kind of the best of all worlds, but you're not looking at a full cage, you're looking at a half back, you're looking at full harnesses with fixed seats, partial fire system, so the car is still usable in other instances like autocross and at DE and things like that, but it's not legal at club racing, but it's also not legal on the street. So it kind of sits in the middle.
Well, then you look at some of the new cars that have those optional sport seats, Porsche with the Corvette, I think the GT350 have those Recaros in them, where they have provisions for you to use a racing harness on the track. The Porsche one, at least, on the driver's side, there's a cutout for a sub belt. There's a sub bar to attach it to underneath. It's part of the mounting system for it.
But now you're back in that whole, you're using an adjustable back seat again still. So if you're saying, ultimate safety is a fixed back seat, there's no way to have a safe street and track car with a fixed back seat unless you're swapping out seats like you described, people are doing.
Well, in the case of those, I know with the Porsches, I'm not sure about, I know BMW has that M4 GTS car. It's like I joke and say it's a BMW Cup car or Club Sport, like the Cayman. The sport buckets, as Porsche calls them, they don't recline. You could tilt it slightly forward to put things in the back seat, but the seat will not recline. It's at a fixed position when it's upright.
Interesting.
It'll tilt forward just a couple inches if you were to want to put a duffel bag, your gym bag, into the back on, where the rear seat would be, like in a GT3, to go to the gym. But yeah, the seats do not recline. They only have a forward where it moves forward a little bit to put packages in the back where the rear seats would be.
Yeah.
In the Porsche world, those are popular with people buying those secondhand.
So let's jump back to close out the whole idea of head and neck restraint there for a second. And you mentioned, Mark, that there's multiple vendors in that particular space, but most of us know two of them, and you mentioned them. It's Hans and it's Simpson. So let's throw it out there. Hans versus Simpson. What do you think? Is Hans passé now? Everybody's moving to the Simpson, or is the Simpson, is it everything that it's cracked up to be? What do you think as a professional? I
still wear a Hans. I have for 15 years. I'm used to it. It's comfortable in the right seat. I was into the tire wall and turn 10. It wasn't a major hit. It had been a race weekend, the guy would have kept driving, but still had it. We did have an impact. It worked. And there was a lot of science. Years and years of development. It was the first one. A lot of the other ones came on the scene. It was really the impetus was Dale Earnhardt's crash. Then you saw that Hutchins, that crazy strap contraption that some of the NASCAR guys were wearing that would basically crush your nuts in a wreck. But it was because it went up between your legs, and it was like you're wearing this like web gear thing. Never sold them, never saw anybody, in our world of road courses wearing them. The Simpson Hybrid S, Simpson did, or somebody paid to have that sled tested like a Hans device. And they tested it with a 3-point seatbelt. It is the only device that was actually tested and SFI certified for use with a 3-point seatbelt. If all you're doing is instructing, or even if you're driving on the track and you have no interest in putting a roll bar, a race seat, going to harnesses, and there are a few instructors I've seen that do it, that haven't, you can use that device with a 3-point seatbelt. I actually did a test ride with one. I had to jump in the right seat the last minute to go with the student, and his instructor hadn't shown, and the chief instructor said, "Here, you want to wear this?" I'm like, "Sure." Might as well test drive it. Hans is owned by Simpson. Simpson also bought Safety Solutions, what got them that whole design for the hybrid. It was an evolution of the old original Safety Solutions R3. Came out, I think, 607, somewhere in there. It's been a long time. The Simpson Hybrid S, not the Sport. They have another one called the Sport that's cheaper. It's about half the price. It has not been tested for 3-point seatbelts. It comes down to fit. Maybe it's just because I'm used to it, but I feel naked without my Hans when I get in the car. Like if I have to get in with a green student with 3-point seatbelts and I can't wear it, and it feels funny. But I also know that I have things there to protect me in that car because it's got curtain airbags, it's got airbag in the seat. These newer cars have airbag. They come out of everywhere to keep my head's not going to snap forward. where I could have the basal skull fracture. A lot of the other designs of, the Stand 21, Hans did allow some of the other manufacturers to make them under license when they were in Europe. OMP made a Hans device, said OMP on it, but it also said Hans on it. But they were allowed to produce it to Hans standards for a licensing thing, because I don't think Hans could sell in Europe. So there were a couple manufacturers who made them under license. It really comes down to what you're doing. If you're primarily instructing and you spend a lot of time getting in beginners' cars, the Hybrid S makes sense, because you know that you can use it with a 3-point belt, or if your car is equipped with harnesses, it works with that too. Me personally, I still wear my Hans. There was a ton of science behind it. The one time I had tested, it worked. I didn't have any neck soreness or anything the next day. I was back in the car.
I was going to ask about the Simpson Hybrid S being as effective with the harnesses as it is with the 3-point, because as an instructor, I actually over the winter just bought a Simpson Hybrid S because I am going to be in and out of students' cars with 3 points. Some students do have harnesses because they've got full-on race cars and things like that. Yeah. And I wanted the Simpson Hybrid S because of the flexibility, but it is just as effective with harnesses as it is.
Careful with the wording, because I don't think that the wording that they used, they didn't say just as effective. They said it will reduce the chance of an injury. And I guess this is the legalese that you got to be careful, for the lawyer speak, be careful of how they word it, because they've said that, what they said is when it was tested, it worked. Will it be just at like 100% as effective with harnesses? I'm not sure, because it's funny. And you ask them, I think you'll get a sort of it passed the test and it was certified answer.
I was going to say that's like 27% of all statistics are made up, but continue your thought.
No, but Brad's right. Will it protect him if he's in the right seat of that beginner's car? And yes.
Now, the thing I have with the Simpson is it looks wholly uncomfortable. Like, it reminds me a lot of the old spine protection that the kart racers had and stuff like that. So for me, I'm okay with the Hans being that yoke around my neck. But on the same token, I've seen it, and there's a sizing issue with the Simpson. To me, it always seems too small on everybody I've seen wear it. It's like, it looks like a G-string. I mean, the Hans kind of is like a one-size-fits-all. As long as you can get it around your neck, it looks appropriate. It looks like it should fit at most everybody. How do you size a Simpson Hybrid? To me, it just, again, it doesn't look right.
If you're me, you just buy the largest one.
The measurement for the strap that comes around, it's almost like if you were buying a dinner jacket. The medium is like 40 to 42, which I think, I wear a 42 on the jacket in my suit. I just remember, not that I've worn one in a long time. And then they have the large, it's how it fits around the torso area. And of course, that little part that comes down part way down, past your shoulders. It's really the strap that seems to be bigger. I think the one I borrowed was a medium, but I'm like average Joe size.
So what you're saying, Mark, is I got to go to my local Joseph A. Banks to get fitted for my Simpson Hybrid.
Yeah, you would want to know your jacket, like a size, like on a blazer. Yes.
Yeah.
It would be helpful.
That's fair. I mean, I'm like you. I've had a Hans for a long time. I'm probably due for some tethers, so I'll come visit you soon.
It's really how does it feel? Is it comfortable? Because you don't want the distraction of it. Like, you're sitting there and that portion of your brain is saying, I don't like this thing. It's uncomfortable. It hurts. I don't like how my head feels. I don't like how it sits on my shoulders. It really comes down to fit. I remember when the precursor to the next gen, when it was called the Defender, when that came out, it had that piece that went over the belt, sort of went in, the piece that sat over your shoulders, and it had that piece over it. And I talked to a guy who bought one, and he said, it's neat. I like it. I like how I know the belts aren't going to slip off, but I have a short neck. It's pushing the chin bar of my helmet up when I'm in the car. When he said he had a Spec Racer Ford, and when he'd sit in it, the seating position of the thing, because he had a short neck, it was pushing on the chin bar of his Bell Dominator or whatever he wore at the time, that had the little, lip spoiler on the chin. And that, that was an interesting observation. And when people would ask about them later, I'd ask them, do you have a really short neck? A lot of muscles on your shoulders that make it look like you have a short neck? Because you may not want to try this device. You may want to go with the Hans because of that extra piece that went over the belt. So it really comes down to fitment. All the devices out there these days have all been tested. with the crash test dummies and shown to work. And then, of course, Brad's case, he liked the hybrid S because he does a lot of instructing, and a lot of times it's in a car that doesn't have harnesses. So it makes sense for him. And I guess, is it comfortable for you?
Yeah, it's
Brad?
comfortable. I haven't had a chance to actually use it on track yet. This weekend coming up is going to be my first time. But I've put it on and worn it around the house just for fun, and it was quite comfortable.
I didn't know you. I didn't know you mowed the lawn with your helmet on, Brad. That's pretty cool.
Safety as a system, Eric.
No, he was doing private modeling. He was only wearing that.
Yes. Just the Simpson in my helmet with a beer in my hand and the steering wheel of the lawnmower in the other.
I mean, it does look like a combination jockstrap codpiece sometimes, so I'm at the right angle. But that aside, so let's switch to Mike for a second from the coach's perspective. And there's this concept in the classroom and at tech and even pre-registration that is this idea of equal restraint. So let's talk about it from your perspective, Mike, and what that means by definition. And then let's go to Mark to kind of back that up as to what equal restraint really means at the end of the day. So Mike, go ahead.
So some of it will come down to instructor preference because some instructors are more tolerant of risk than others. But basically it means anything that the driver has available to protect themselves in terms of the seat, the restraints, and any other devices needs to be equivalent on the passenger side. So if the driver is using a 5-point harness and a fixed back seat, you can't have a stock seat and a 3-point belt in the passenger seat. I've seen cases where both sides had a fixed back seat or even a reclining sports seat where the driver had like a Schroth 4-point or maybe even a 5-point, but there wasn't equivalent on the passenger side. And oftentimes I've seen, especially in the case where it's like sport reclining seats and where the instructor just made the student use his 3-point belt instead. Because when that student is using that 3-point belt rather than the harnesses, they actually become a little self-conscious themselves and dial it back a bit. So that's the best compromise I've seen in a case where there was the ability to have equal restraint, but the maximum level was not available on both sides.
So as we turn this over to Mark, does that mean when I come into OG and I'm shopping for seats, I've got to buy 2 OMP WRCs? Or does that really mean I just have to have what's known as like in kind? Seats are both black and they can both support 5-point harnesses or 6-point, and I have to have 6-point harnesses on both sides. Or what's your recommendation there? If you're going to do it, Schroths all around or whatever, everything matching. So what is it a loose interpretation of equal restraint? What does it mean to you as a distributor?
What it means to me is if the driver has a race seat, there needs to be one for the passenger. If the driver is using a harness, there needs to be one for the passenger. I see it plenty of times, and it's acceptable. I've gotten in cars this way, where the driver may have an OMP HTE halo seat, but on the passenger side, he's got a WRC. On his side, he'll have an OMP harness. On the passenger side, since it doesn't get used much, he's got a G-force harness. Am I okay with that? Yes. Does it meet the rules? Yes. Because I'm in a fixed back racing seat with a harness that I can use my head and neck restraint as the driver is doing. Yeah, they don't have to be like a perfect match. Like if you were to go to the track, I wouldn't do it. I've never seen anybody else do it. Oh, you have a Sparco Pro ADV on your side and only an Evo on the other side. No, I'm not getting in the car. Like you don't have to have 2 halos. Having a halo over the passenger seat does restrict vision. With that second one over there, it really bottles up when if you're trying to throw that quick glance, to the right, just to double check your mirror. The way I've always interpreted it, and I think I've seen it with the clubs. I've seen cars go in the grid that way. People, the passenger side, they're going to maybe seldom going to be used. If it's an instructor that I'll throw a passenger seat in this weekend because I may want to take my student for a ride. Yeah, the seats don't have to be the exact same seat and the exact same belts. As long as you're providing the same type of restraint that you have as a driver to the passenger, that's acceptable.
To use Tanya as an example again, she's tiny. She can have a tiny little seat, but she's not going to find an instructor who fits in that tiny little seat most of the time. So, or even a student, if she's instructing. So having a more general purpose, friendly, equivalent seat, like a more accommodating fixed back seat in the passenger seat that will fit a wider range of people is actually a very good idea, because you're more likely to be able to have someone safely secured in that seat than sitting awkwardly on top of it or uncomfortably contorted in it.
That's acceptable. I've seen it. I see that all the time. You got a driver who's a smaller guy. He's got his, skinny European guy Sparco circuit seat. Better be wearing your skinny jeans and a 30-inch waist to fit in it because it's tight. But for the passenger side, to accommodate his range of instructors, maybe you've got an Evo 2 because it fits. I've seen people do that all the time. They want the brand to be the same, but it's not the same model. And that's have some people, I don't want to have a OMP driver's seat and a Sparco passenger seat or vice versa. They like to at least match the brand. But yeah, you want to put a seat in that'll accommodate a wider range of passengers because your instructors are all different too.
Well, maybe it's the stance bro in me. I'm vain. I want my seats to look the same. So I got matching seats for my car, matching belts. But to your point, Mike, about Tanya's car, not to call her out on the episode, but she's on here enough. People have gotten used to hearing her. But yeah, she's got matching Corsas in that Beetle. And I tell you what, interesting story. We bought them at OG, and the one she has on her driver's side was a floor model. So it had been sat in a bunch and somewhat, I would say, stretched, because the one that came out of the warehouse is really tight and it's really uncomfortable. I don't know what it is. Padding,
Yeah, the padding compresses. Even the parts you can't take out. You could pull the bottom cushion and the thigh bolster cushion, and even on the old days before they made it a one piece, you could pull that little pad that's behind your back, take all that stuff out. Interesting. The one she ended up putting on the driver's side was the display.
Yep.
And after being sat in by however many people over the course of a year or two, padding got a little compressed.
It is so much more comfortable. I've sat in the passenger one, and it's like my whole bottom half goes numb after a while. I mean, it's a really tight fit.
The Corsa's a tight seat. I've sat in those.
But she's of a smaller stature, so for her it's perfect. But for the rest of us, normal humans, it ain't going to fit. But with that being said, when talking about being stylish, let's talk about racing gear, because that's the next thing. Everybody wants to look like a race car driver, right? So I got to get my helmet, I got to get my shoes, I got to get my driving suit and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about, helmet sizing and fitment and racing suits and cool suits, alternatives.
I just want to piggyback on the helmet discussion, because Mark, you and I had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about this, but I'm looking at everything through the big guy lens. And so everything I ask is geared towards me and Mike and the other people in the group. But the discussion of helmets, and are there helmets that are lower profile than others?
To answer your question, there are manufacturers who make a more compact shell. Like I've found that, out there in the market of the ones that we carry and the ones that I put my hands on and put on my head, the Arise and the Stilos have a more compact shell than, say, a Bell. The Bells tend to be a little bit bigger. And in your case, being a 6'4" big guy, you probably have a lot of issues getting fitted where you don't want your helmet buttoned up against your roll cage. And you can find some room in some of the other manufacturers that do make a more compact shell. It still meets both the SA and the FIA standards, for the helmets that are also get the FIA certification, but in a tighter package. And that must be with some of the stuff they use on the inside for the padding that allows them to have the same amount of protection in a smaller shell. I always tell people when we start with helmets, because all our heads are shaped differently, whether it's, around the crown of our head, or some people have like fuller cheeks than other people. Some people have sort of a long skinny head. Some people have a round head. And of course, a helmet manufacturer can't make 3 different shapes of each model of helmet. It's just not cost effective. So they try to get one that's sort of in the ballpark that'll try to fit a wide range of drivers, but then we'll offer different thickness cheek pads. On Stilo, you can remove the crown pad on top of your head and go thicker or thinner to get the helmet to sit properly on your head. Some manufacturers don't let you take the cheek pads out. I think they all should at this point, but not all of them do. They're glued in the one piece from the whole bottom half of the helmet. But that being said, about our heads are different. When you go to try helmets on, try for fit. So it's just like a pair of shoes. You're not going to buy a pair of shoes that are uncomfortable. You don't want a helmet that's uncomfortable. It's not only is it protecting your noggin, but you don't want the distraction of, man, my head, my helmet just doesn't fit right. And one common mistake a lot of first-time buyers make with a helmet, they buy a helmet that's too big. And they slip it on, so you think, oh, this feels pretty good. And then after you wear it and break it in and the padding compresses a little bit, and you find out later, I've seen people in a panic. I look at them like, your helmet's too big. Maybe they just went on a website, Googled, whichever model helmet it was, and hit the first link that popped up, purchased it online, didn't talk to anybody. There are measurement you can take to get you in the ballpark if you have the opportunity to. If you're at a track that has a trackside store, like Summit Point has the Mach 5 Pro Shop, they have helmets in there. You can go try on a couple different brands. If you go to NJMP, the general store, she's got different brands of helmets in there. Try one on if you can, because there's nothing worse than having an ill-fitting helmet.
A lot of beginners will come out there with a motorcycle helmet that they borrowed from their buddy. And Can you explain why that's a bad idea?
Well, it's funny. I've seen, including PCA, will let you use a M-rated helmet through Blue Group, which would be like, the equivalent to HPDE2 in NASA, and I'm sure like your intermediate group, I guess, with Hooked on Driving. It's not the beginner, but it's still, you're in an instructed group, but the drivers in there have experience. Once you get to solo groups, they require an SA or FIA rated helmet. I could see the beginner coming out for the first time. He wants to check it out and see if the hobby's for him. But, if the guy's been coming out to the track for 2 years and he's still wearing a motorcycle helmet, he needs to get a helmet, because I think they're crash tested differently. And of course, motorcycle helmets won't have a fire resistant lining to them, like a helmet made for motorsports. It comes down to having the proper gear. The beginners, I get it. If you've been doing it, if you go through a first season of it, obviously you're committed at that point. It's time for the proper helmet.
So I think you make a really valid point there, and I'm sure the listeners are probably scratching their heads going, when you talk about crash resistance, technically a motorcycle helmet would have better crash resistance than a car helmet would, just because of the fact that you're in the open air. But I think what the major difference here is the fire retardant part of the helmet is much more involved in a car, because you're in an enclosed space, unless you're running that E-prepared Miata like we were talking about earlier. But so that's the real big thing here. And that's the reason why, when we talk about a lot of this stuff, again, it works as a system. There's a lot of Nomex gear that we wear in motorsport that you don't wear on a motorcycle. In a motorcycle, you wear leathers. I mean, granted, there's probably some fire retardant stuff on motorcycles too, but it's very different. The race suits are different. Everything is different between those two disciplines. So in this case, car helmets for cars, motorcycle helmets for motorcycles. That is the rule of thumb. But I'm glad to see that some clubs, to get people ingratiated into the sport, are allowing them to at least not sacrifice their investment and say, hey, for your first couple events, come on out with your M helmet and you're good to go. I've also seen this with karting, where karting, for whatever reason, requires SA helmets and not M helmets as well. Again, look at the different disciplines to see what the regulations allow and require. Go ahead, Mike.
But the cart, you're strapped into the cart.
That's true.
That has gasoline behind you usually.
That's
motorcycle,
true.
you just fall off.
And skip across the ground like skipping a stone.
Let's go back to Fitment for a minute, because I don't think we closed out that thought. And to your point about bigger helmets and things like that, and this is why it's important to get fitted. There are companies that run small in terms of their cut. So it's like, it's funny. A lot of this is like buying shoes. Once you know how you fit a certain manufacturer, you know what to buy, and you're always that, let's say size 11 Adidas, even though you're actually a 9.5, because a 9.5 is super uncomfortable just because they cut their stuff small. So the same is true, I found, of like Sparco and some of the other helmets. I prefer the Bells. I want to try on a Roo, but I don't want to look like an astronaut with all those hookups either, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I have found my actual Fitment size is an L, and I have a large Bell, and it becomes incredibly uncomfortable even after I've broken it in. So what I've done is I upgraded and I wear an XL, and it's ridiculous, but at the end of the day, after a long day, I feel less claustrophobic, and I don't have all that pushing and basically the headache that comes with wearing a helmet that realistically fits me but really doesn't fit me comfortably. And so I think it's really important that people do try them on and try on all sorts of different helmets, because a large Sparco is not the same as a large Bell, is not the same as a large Rue at the end of the day.
No, like exactly. I'm on my 4th Bell helmet. They're all size 7.5, and they're 4 different models as they progressed over the years. It's consistent. They consistently fit me. If I were to put on an Arai GP6, I need an extra large. I can't even get a large on my head. Stilo, large plus. I don't remember what size Simpson I tried on, but Simpson just didn't fit my head. It was nothing wrong with the Simpson helmet. It's my head, the shape of my noggin just didn't fit in the thing. Same with the Rooks helmet. Wanted one of those with the integrated communications gear. I was all about it. I tried changing cheek pads. What it was around the crown of my head. My head just didn't fit in it properly. Just not comfortably, or it was like it was sitting more on my head than my head being in it, which is, I like my helmet. I feel like it's in it. It's in, it's down, it's tight, because it's, you don't want an uncomfortable helmet. You're distracted because that little portion of your brain is going to be going, man, I hate this helmet. Man, I hate this helmet. While you're going down the chute at Summit Point.
And just to add on to that, how should a helmet fit? Like, what does a proper fitting helmet feel like?
It needs to be snug. It needs to feel like it's tight. Slight, pressure on your cheeks, but not that where you can't speak without biting the inside of your cheek. That's generally what I tell people. What you don't want are an uncomfortable pressure right on your forehead. You'll know if it's too tight. If you put it on in the showroom and walking around, and within 2 or 3 minutes it starts to hurt, because it could be that you have I'll go to the Adventures of Mark Francis for a second. I've had like this in between size head that I tried the size down and it was slightly too tight, and so the size I wear now with a head sock is perfect. Without the head sock, after it broke in, it feels a little loose. My old helmet that I raced in for several years that I now use when I go karting, I didn't even take a balaclava anymore, but it's funny. It doesn't fit the same without it. You don't want it to feel like without a chin strap, if you were to abruptly flop your head forward, have the thing come off. Your head needs to stay in it.
Since we're still talking about helmets, a lot of organizations allow you to run open face. How do you feel about open face helmets?
Personally, I've worn one time at a track days event where I was asked to get in a car and I didn't have my gear. And I'll tell you what, it felt weird because I've always worn a full face helmet. I've always wanted that protection, whether it's debris. What happens if I hit a deer and the thing comes, pieces of it come through the windshield or the side door. I don't want to have my face messed up. Now, of course, there have been all these, various discussions about open face or full face in a car with airbags, but I don't know the right answer for that one, because you hear on the forums, you hear everybody arguing both sides of that all day long. I mean, personally, I like a full face helmet. Open faced for autocross, sure. On the track, I don't know. It just feels weird. It's just like why, I wouldn't go out on the track without a shirt on or barefoot.
So visors up or visors down when you're behind a windshield?
I keep mine cracked at the bottom. I need a little airflow. I get claustrophobic when it's shut all the way. But then again, I've never driven an open car. Obviously, an open car would be closed. So I'd have to learn how to deal with it.
There's other parts to this whole setup. The helmet is just part of it. And nowadays the helmets are already pre-drilled for Hans Weisses and Simpsons and all that, for anchor posts and whatnot.
Yeah.
But
they have the threaded terminals are molded into the shell during the manufacturing process. Yeah, you're not allowed to drill any holes in a helmet right now. It'll void the certification. I know FIA has made that very clear. The days of wiring up radios and popping a couple rivets in to rivet the connection for your earbuds onto the side of the helmet. We used to drill helmets for Hans anchors. Guys used to drill holes in the chin bar to run a drink tube. You cannot do any of that anymore. It voids the certification.
That's actually really good to know, because I had a helmet drilled years ago, and so I didn't realize that was the case.
Well, back then you could. The pro team, you see the pros running the 24 hours of Daytona with a drink tube going right through the chin bar. Now you can't make any alterations to the shell per the FIA. That's why you see these manufacturers now like Stilo and Rooks it's already in there. And there's like a little cool shirt adapter on the side to plug a drink line into, to get your hydration. The threaded terminals are now in there to screw the Hans anchors into. No more getting painter's tape and a Sharpie and a tape measure and measuring and drilling holes in it and putting a backing washer between the padding and the shell and screwing the anchors in. That went out with the SA-15 helmets. All the SA-15 helmets had threaded terminals molded into the shell during the manufacturing process, trying to get in line with the FIA certifications.
So since you brought that up, we actually talked about this a good bit on an episode called Things I Wish I Knew as a Noob, where we discuss helmets and gloves and things of that nature with Brad and Mike, who are here with us tonight. And one of the things I wanted to just bring up again, since we're talking about it, is the expiration and certification dates of helmets. Now, most people don't realize helmets are good for about 11 years. And that's because there's a 1-year grace period there where the new helmets generally aren't out yet. And so, you aren't going to buy your 2020 helmet until probably 2021. And that just has to do with manufacturing, logistics, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, time for all the distributors to have inventory for you to make a selection. Yes.
Exactly.
I was made aware that 2 weeks ago, SCCA has said they will allow an SA 2010 helmet through next year to the end of the season. So I think other clubs will follow suit, at least maybe to 6 months. I know in the past, PCA and NASA have said, we'll let you use it till June 30th of the next year. By then, we'll want you to have it. In 2015, there was a supply shortage when the SA-15s came out. Bell had moved their worldwide manufacturing. There was obviously logistical hiccups with getting that up and running and getting the helmets produced. 2 other manufacturers didn't even release theirs till January of 2017, was by the time we received them. So we'd already missed a year, going through the SA ratings, testing process. They were late. But yeah, generally you're right. A lot of the clubs we're going to give you that grace period. In this case, SCCA has said the end of 21.
Right.
The other clubs have not made a decision yet. They've implied that, we're probably going to give you some extra time, but they haven't put it in, in an email blast yet, what it is. We haven't seen it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, most of the reason the helmet, quote unquote, expires, I've heard 2 different things. One, the outer casing or, the M&M shell there holding all that gooey chocolate inside gets brittle over time. And that wears down because, and the enamel and all that stuff that's on the outside for the paint. But also your sweat, because it bleeds into the foam and the material inside the helmet, accelerates the breakdown of the fire retardant material and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they say it could, and with each certification, they may come up with a new safety feature that's part of that. Like when FIA came out, they used to have FIA 8859, and then when they came out with FIA 8860, there was more reinforcement in the chin bar and the frontal area around the eye port, and I think that was something that came out of after the incident where Felipe Massa took a spring off Rubens Barrichello's brawn that hit him right where his shield was. That led to them putting that piece along the top, and now these double pane visors that you see on some helmets.
Interesting.
More protection because it broke through and hit him. It cracked his skull above his eye. It nearly killed him. But that led to changes in that reinforcement area around the front of the helmet. Here's a question you're going to hear from your probably new people showing up at your event this weekend. When are the 2020 helmets coming out? Should I just wait and get a 2020? The answer is, I always tell people it depends. How much are you going to the track? Oh, I do like 12 events a year. And I ask them, you really think you're going to wear the helmet for 10 to 11 years of sweating in it, of, getting paint chips, bumping it against a roll cage, getting out of the car or whatever. And, a lot of times they'll be like, no. So, then there's a chance to pick up an SA-15 on sale, because they will all be on sale, especially when the 20s start shipping, which will be October 1st, by the way, is when, according per the Snell Foundation rules, manufacturers can start shipping them to their distribution network starting on October 1st of this year.
I will say I've used my 2010 helmet since 2014. And Eric knows just how many track events I've done in that thing.
Yeah.
It could do its own track day at this point. It could drive
it's measured in dog years at this point.
Yeah, typically the manufacturers will, sort of the party line, for lack of a better term, they'll say in 5 years it's time to get a helmet if you're using it a lot. Now for the autocrosser that does a couple autocrosses a year, we know what's typical autocross runs about a minute 10 seconds, maybe less. They're not really, the helmet's not getting the wear and tear of an HPDE or a club racer person. You're not wearing it for long periods of time. You put your helmet on, you do your autocross first of your 3 or 4 runs of the day, come in, you take it off.
I would not be surprised if my helmet has 160 days on it.
That's good. You've had it for 6 years. The longest I've worn one is, I think I wore one helmet for 7. But the funny thing is there was a stretch of about 3 of those years where I wore it once that season.
So, Mark, another big question that comes up, and this is, again, along the lines of wives' tales and mythbusters here. I've heard if you drop your helmet from any height, be it an inch or 10 feet, it's time to throw it away and get another one. Now, there's always instances, and I've heard swearing all over the paddock. Somebody had it on the roof, and they didn't grab it right, or it fell off the cage or off the hook, or, you had it on the fender of the go-kart and it hit the ground. I mean, what's the truth here? I mean, you don't want to do it repeatedly or beat it into the ground. Can your helmet take a fall and you don't have to rush out tomorrow and go buy another one?
Depends on the fall. How many times have I seen it in 23 years of going to the track where, the guy gets out and he sits it on the roof of his car and it sits, and then, blue run group, 5-minute call, and the guy jumps in the car, fires it up, throws it in gear, drives away, and that helmet, rolls off the car and bounces across the paddock. Yeah, it's not good for it. I'm very careful with mine, and I even reinforce that with students. Be very careful with it. Don't sit it there. Nope. Take it off. Sit it when I get out of the car. Sit it on the passenger, down on the footwell, not even on the seat. Just so it doesn't bounce around. Now, is it true that if it were to fall off, say, sitting on the wing on the back of your TT, and fall and hit the ground? To be honest with you, I don't know. That's a question for an engineer. I would ask a manufacturer for definitive. Yes, I've heard the same thing. I was told that at one point when I was a beginner. If your helmet falls and hits the ground, it's done. And one of the people was a doctor. So I don't know. I tell everybody, just be safe. Don't leave it sitting on the top of your car. Don't leave it sitting on the open tailgate of your pickup truck. Because if you decide, oh shoot, I got to run to the gas pumps, and you're going to forget it's there, it's going to fall off. And also, don't leave it sitting out in the sun. That is bad for it. You see too many people doing that. It's sitting on the roof of the car at Summit Point in August. That's not a good idea. Keep it in the shade.
It's not good for it, and it's not good for you. I don't want to put a hot helmet on.
Yeah, I've actually walked by people's cars and picked it up and set it inside the car. And then, hey, I put your helmet. Don't leave it up here.
Yeah, so listeners, if you've ever wondered why your helmet moved from where it was and mysteriously ended up in your car, it's Mark. Yeah, 100%. The last portion of our conversation here, now we're graduating into the clothing part of this, because it is, again, part of the system. And we're not advocating that everybody rush out tomorrow and go buy all this stuff, but they definitely need to be aware that it all works together. So just like the seats and the belts, the helmet, and the Hans and the neck restraint and whatever, now we get into the clothing you wear at the track. And so, Mike, oftentimes the rules state you must wear long clothing, cotton, and things like that. Do you want to elaborate on that?
The rules for long sleeves have especially been relaxed in recent years. Don't be surprised if you show up to a track event and you are required to have long, they might even get so hard as non-heavily fire reactive material. I'll put it that way. No polyester sweatpants or anything like that. They're probably going to want you to have a cotton or cotton blend pant.
You mean no juicy yoga pants while I'm driving my juicy van? Anyway, that's from another episode.
They could be cotton. You don't know.
Yeah.
Closed-toed shoes, and possibly requiring a long sleeve shirt for while you're in the car. Surprised if all that.
And jeans are usually preferred as well because they're a heavy cotton material and cotton shirts, etc. And again, to your point, that's because of their flame resistance. They will light on fire. It's just more difficult to light cotton on fire, heavy cotton on fire, than it is a lot of other materials. Yeah. So, Mark, as an expert in this arena, do we all need to just run out and go buy fire suits tomorrow, or are we going to be okay if we're just wearing jeans and a t-shirt?
When I instruct, I still wear jeans and a long, whether they're going long or short sleeve. I'll wear a long sleeve cotton t-shirt. All too often, I see people wearing, sports fabric, moisture wicking stuff, like you said, polyester. What happens to polyester if it is exposed to flame? It melts. What happens when the polyester melts on your skin? It sticks. That's why I tell guys, don't wear that, your cool sport fabric, body hugging workout clothes to drive on the track. Jeans are good. Long sleeve cotton shirt is fine. There are, if you want to wear a suit, and there's been, the last few years, there's been a lot of talk. I'm seeing more people at drivers' ed events wearing a driving suit. You can wear a single layer of fire-resistant material. It's not going to set you back $700 or $800. They're about $150. I've seen guys they go to the surplus store and get a flight suit. Maybe the helicopter or fighter pilots wear in the military. Those are fire-resistant. And they're thin, a little more comfortable.
So that kind of brings up some wives' tales there, right? So is it true that the Nomex thread breaks down?
I don't know 100%. I've heard that eventually the treatment that's part of when it's made can. My suit was manufactured in 2005, probably worn it maybe 12 times, 15 times maybe total. I had a block of years I didn't race. So it stayed in the closet. I'd bring it home, I wash it properly, I let it dry, and then it goes back, it's hanging in my closet. It's not balled up, out in the garage. So that one I'm not 100% sure on, actually, if it degrades or not. Now, the newer FIA certifications that started with this products made for this year now have an expiration date. Before, as long as your suit met the current standard, let's say, in the case of my suit, 8856-2000 is still a valid FIA standard. So therefore, if I were to go to a pro race, it would pass tech. The stuff that it came out is, for 2020 models now have a new certification on it. And I think they're going 8 to 10 years max. Obviously, if your suit's on fire, if you're in a car that's on fire and you had to discharge your fire system and get out, you need a new suit. Yeah. You're not going to wear it again.
For other reasons.
The big thing, when the beginners ask me, I'll tell them one thing that's important: get a good pair of shoes. Don't show up in your nearly inch-thick sole running shoes or shoes you'd wear hiking on a trail because you're losing pedal feel. I'll tell them, you want to make your first investment in safety gear, get a pair of driving shoes and a pair of gloves. Gloves that give you a more relaxed grip on the steering wheel. Leather steering wheel, hot day at the track, bare palms, sweaty hands. You're going to be gripping the steering wheel tighter because your hands are slippery. The gloves make you have a more relaxed grip. Relaxed grip releases tension going up through your arms to your shoulders. When you're tensed up like that, your body's expending energy. Anything to make you more comfortable so you're not holding on with the Vulcan death grip on the steering wheel. And the shoes, I like, driving shoe for pedal feel. So you could, get a more sense, you could, the gas brake, clutch, unless you have a, DSG or a PDK. Those are the two places I generally, somebody asks me, okay, I'm ordering my helmet. What else do you think I should get? And I'll tell them, get a pair of shoes. You could buy a Nomex pair of racing shoes that will be legal if you want to race for under $100. There's several out there. You don't have to spend, $250 on a Nomex shoe. Same thing with a pair of gloves. You can get a good pair of driving gloves, racing gloves, for $60 all day long.
Let me know when they have a 13.4E driving shoe.
4E?
Yeah.
Well, I know OMP makes a shoe that the OMP1, it's like an oversized. It's an extra wide. I don't know if it's 4E. I'd have to look. But they make a wide shoe for people. Some people have wide feet.
For a second there, he said OMP, whatever that model was. I thought he was telling you to put race seats on your feet.
Same difference.
Well, remember, OMP makes driver gear too. It's really good stuff too.
Let's talk about gloves again for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this in our noobs episode, but Mark, best color for a glove?
I'll tell people, get a glove that's not the same color as your car in the HPDE setting. And there are a few manufacturers that make nice bright yellow, easy to see when you're giving your hand signals that we're all still doing at HPDE/driver's ed. You know, if you have a black car, don't get a black glove. You know,
Oops, sorry.
And for in the HPD setting. Now, hey, I'll be the first to admit I had blue the first time, but I've had black gloves too. Currently, it's gray.
I look like Darth Vader when I'm out there. Everything's black, so.
They're all blacked out. Yeah, but you're also driving an instructor group too.
True.
But I tell the beginners, you know, if you have a yellow car, then yeah, get a black glove or a red glove, or, you know, does all your stuff have to match? Some people want it to. Doesn't have to. I'd say on shoes, stay away from red. I've noticed with the red shoes, eventually they start to turn pink, you know, as they fade out. You know, shoes and they show dirt things. You know, get a darker color on your shoes, especially if you're going to walk around in the paddock in them all day.
So to your point, Mark, about shoes, so I want to kind of give you a little bit of rebuttal or counterpoint there. A couple things I found with driving shoes, right? I have a set of Sparco booties. I love them. I use them when I'm competing, but I also wear them with my race suit, with my long socks, with my whole setup, right? Because it's all Nomex and it all goes together. However, as a coach, I'm in and out of the car all day long. I'm running around the paddock like a chicken with my head cut off. They are not the most comfortable shoes in the world, and they are not the most resilient, especially if the paddock isn't smooth. You go somewhere like Palmer, where I don't know if it is anymore, where it used to be all gravel, or some of these,
where's
paddocks,
the soles out?
Yeah, it tears up the shoes. So I usually recommend people, if you want to get the same experience for even less money and save a couple bucks, go buy yourself some Adidas Samba indoor soccer shoes, or some classic Chucks, or something that's a flat shoe with a thin sole, and you can pick them up for 40 bucks or 50 bucks or whatever at your local Target. But the upside is they hold up better when it rains. They hold up better when you're walking around all day, and they just kind of hold up better all together. So I think when you're learning, I wouldn't really say get hung up on buying, you know, off the shelf shoes. They look really cool. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it puts the whole package together, right? But what are your thoughts on that?
I drove in wrestling shoes till I had to have Nomex when I did my first club race. Because, they were 40, 50 bucks at Sports Authority. And I got the same thin sole feel. The one thing you notice when you do put on a pair of driving shoes, and I wear Chucks around the paddock all the time. And I've jumped in a car at the last minute to go drive in my Chucks, you know, from time to time at the track. The only thing is, you know, when you're sitting with, you know, with your feet basically resting on your heels, that's where you feel the difference. You know, the driving shoe has the sole that comes up over the backside of your heel, and there is a little extra padding in there, so that is more comfortable. But you're right. Walking around in them all day, I've got a pair that I wear at driver's eds, and my boots that I race in. The race boots, I don't wear at a DE, because a lot of times once I put my driving shoes on, I stay in them unless it's raining. Then I will come in and take my shoes off. But I like having the Nomex on my feet just in case. You know, feet and hands and face. To me, the three big places you don't want to have burn. Now, how likely is a fire? It seems like these days not very, but just in case.
Absolutely.
You know, those would be the hardest things to deal with if let's say I happen to be in some guy's older race car and we had a fire. You know, I don't want my feet burnt. We need our feet to walk. We need our hands to do things and to feed ourselves and open doors and everything else. So that's where I tend, at a DE, every time I get in a car, that's usually where I have my Nomex on all the time.
And one last question about the suits, right? And what you should be kind of going into battle with as we put all this stuff together. What's your recommendation for under a driving suit? If you decide to go down that path, what would you wear underneath of your racing suit?
Commando.
I mean, if you want to go walk around the paddock like Elvis with the thing zipped down to your navel, I mean, that's fine, but you got to wear something under there.
When I have my driving suit on, I have a short sleeve fire resistant shirt, but most of the time I'm wearing some sort of cotton boxer briefs. You can get Nomex underwear, and obviously the more layers you put on, the more protection you have. The technology has gotten as such that, a 3-layer driving suit today feels paper thin compared to a 3-layer driving suit from even 10 years ago. As these manufacturers, it's like everything else. It's like with cars and electronics and cell phones and TVs and everything else. They've made it where the Nomex has become lighter and more breathable. Underneath, typically, a lot of times I'll have a cotton T-shirt. I have a 3-layer driving suit now. Cotton T-shirt, cotton boxer briefs. And I will wear Nomex socks. Of course, it's required.
So going back to what you said before about like the dry fit clothing and the Under Armour, et cetera, because of the protection that the race suit gives you, is it okay to wear that type of material under the race suit?
Well, the race suit will keep the flames out, but you're still going to get hot. I would my recommendation would be don't wear that fabric in a race car. Now, the manufacturers are getting more into that make the Nomex are now making these moisture wicking, but it is fire resistant material. And it's actually really nice compared to what it was. I've got an old Nomex turtleneck from like year 2005 that is, I wear it on cold days. Like if we were out the track in February or March where it's 35 degrees in the morning, because it's a layer of warmth. But if you hold it up to something today on the shelf, you're like, good God, this thing feels like it's 4 times as thick. I understand what you're saying about the moisture wicking stuff, but if you look at some of the undergarments made by, Sparco, OMP, Alpine Stars, putting that moisture wicking properties into a fire resistant shirt, and it works. And there was a company called Track Gear that had a really nice, I don't know how he came up with it, the guy founder and the guy that developed the stuff, and they were black, but I wore it underneath my suit, and how much cooler I felt. I stopped wearing my regular T-shirt, whatever random T-shirt I had on that day underneath my driving suit after seeing the newer undergarments and what they do and how much more comfortable it is, because they do it's weird. They breathe, but they keep the fire out. Now they'll still get warm. Obviously fire makes heat. You're going to get warm. That's why I just don't like the idea of wearing, the Under Armour, whatever, the sports fabric polyester stuff. I don't think it's the brightest idea. People do it, but there are motorsports undergarments that'll give you some of those properties that you can wear and be safe at the same time.
Nice. So, Mark, before we wrap this up, is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to bring up that, newbies and intermediates and even advanced drivers alike maybe haven't thought about in a while that we didn't cover in this particular episode that you want to mention?
Well, I would say to newbies, and, we are in an era now where the cars coming off the dealer lots are faster in a lot of cases of cars that were raced at the professional level 10 or 11 years ago. Right out of the box, they are faster. The beginners are coming out to the track. Think safety first, because we still see guys coming out, beginners, and they've got, their brand new Corvette. Oh, and I just had it at such and such, and it's now 790 horsepower at the wheels. But 3-point belts, no head neck restraint. Guys, get out on the track, drive the car a little bit, get used to it. Go safety over horsepower. I've been preaching that as an instructor even before I was in this business. The business of motorsports and safety gear. Don't rush, I guess would be a lack of better term. Build up your experience. The speed comes. You're going to get there. All too often we see guys that, come out that first day, and after that first day, they want to go buy a race car. Now, there are some that can actually pick up that fast where they could be, they have that natural talent, that some of that talent that we as instructors can't teach, so that natural ability, whatever you want to call it, God-given ability. Take the right approach, take it slow, learn, have fun at the same time. The speed comes, you'll get there.
Absolutely. And Mark, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. OG has been supporting GTM now since we started. I mean, thanks to you and thanks to people like Matt Yip and others.
Yeah, I was going to say Matt Yip.
Yeah, that we've been involved with forever. So, OG's been a great sponsor. I mean, there's other distributors out there and other safety equipment manufacturers. Obviously, you're the closest one to us in the DMV, and we'll continue to, support you guys.
Hope to see some of you guys come by to OG Racing. We are in our 30th year. 30 since the company was founded in 1990 by Bill Love. We've come a long way. Everyone on staff are car people. We've got instructors. We've got racers. We've got former racers. We've got autocrossers. We've been doing this a long time. We keep a large stock of inventory in the building. We're not a bunch of guys with a website and an iPhone. We've a lot of experience. Bill's had a lot of experience in, picking the best products that are out there in this industry. We pride ourselves on our excellent customer service, having what you want in stock, getting, 97% of the orders shipped the same day, just depending on the time of day they come in. We really push our customer service and our long-term relationships with our customers, and we've all made a lot of friends along the way.
For the listeners out there, visit ogracing.com. They do more than just safety gear. As Mark alluded to, they've got brake pads in stock and fluids and all sorts of other things that you need for your track day or your track weapon or your autocross car or whatever it might be. But, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show. This thing could have been probably 6 hours long because we could nosedive on any one of these topics, but we're hoping our listeners are getting more and more exposure to what it's like to be in motorsport, answering some of these tougher questions, and maybe, just maybe, after this conversation, feel just a little bit safer about the whole concept of HPDE and track time. So again, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. One more plug. We launched our new website during the COVID lockdown. Inventory is live on the website, so come check us out. ogracing.com.
But on that note, I think it's time to end. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, I think we've beat this horse to death.
Yeah.
But at least he's wearing a harness.
Yes.
I just want to say thanks for having me. This has been a great time. I'd love to do it again.
Oh, definitely.
Absolutely.
We'll come up with another topic.
Hey, listeners, did you enjoy this particular episode? Did you know you can learn more about what we just talked about by visiting the GTM website? If you want to learn more or just review the materials from this episode, be sure to log on to www.gtmotorsports.org today and search for this particular episode. From all of us at GTM, never stop learning.
If you like what you've heard and want to learn more about GTM, be sure to check us out on www.gtmotorsports.org. You can also find us on Instagram at Grand Touring Motorsports. Also, if you want to get involved or have suggestions for future shows, you can call or text us at 202-630-1770 or send us an email at crewchief@gtmotorsports.org. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey listeners, Crew Chief Eric here. Do you like what you've seen, heard, and read from GTM? Great, so do we, and we have a lot of fun doing it. But please remember, we're fueled by volunteers and remain a no annual fee organization. But we still need help to keep the momentum going so that we can continue to record, write, edit, and broadcast all of your favorite content. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports or visit our website and click in the top right corner on the support and donate to learn how you can help.